It is a pleasure to welcome you today for this lecture series. I have the great privilege to introduce to you Dr. Anthony Gisby-Eli, a distinguished scientist and innovator in the field of bioengineering and biomaterials. With his groundbreaking research, Dr. Anthony has been at the forefront of advancing healthcare technologies, developing innovative solutions for tissue engineering, drug delivery, and biosensing. His pioneering work has garnered international recognition and has significantly contributed to the field's understanding and applications. Dr. Anthony has been with Unicity since the beginning of this week and has been delivering several interesting and innovative talks to the whole team. Today, we have the honor to learn from Dr. Anthony as he shares his invaluable insights and expertise with us on engineering the innovation ecosystem. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Anthony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sandra. I appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you also very much for joining us this evening in this presentation. For those of you who are online, I hope I welcome you, and for those of you in the audience here, thank you so much for taking the time of your day to join us in this presentation. We're celebrating 10 years of Unicity International Education Hub, and I'm delighted to be part of these celebrations that have been ongoing and will be continuing on through this month as we celebrate 10 years of successful development of international education here in Mauritius under the auspices of the Medellin Group. I want to talk a little bit of engineering the innovation ecosystem, and I specifically want to talk about the following. I want to say a few words about myself. I'll talk about the story of innovation, who, how, and why, specifically about the innovation ecosystem, and these particular two topics about funding, investments, and changing the ecosystem, and then the supportive infrastructure that's needed to support innovation. And I want to pick two areas. Well, one area really, energy, and two approaches, the use of solar farms and turbines to address energy needs, which I think would be highly relevant in the Mauritius situation. So, you can hear that I have a funny accent, and that simply means that I was not born in the US. I was born, in fact, in Trinidad and Tobago, this little island in the Caribbean. And that's where I grew up, went to school initially, and from there, while there, attended the University of the West Indies, attended subsequently the University of Manchester, the Institute of Science and Technology, and subsequently MIT. One of the wonderful things is that, of course, I took with me my history of creative engagement with music, the steel band that originated in Trinidad and Tobago. I learned to appreciate soccer and the Manchester City versus Manchester United challenge. And one of the things I learned at MIT, of course, is the resolve that even snow and ice will not keep you from closing. Yes, we are open for business. So I met my dear wife, Annette, at the University of the West Indies. There we are at a conference to which we were both invited as keynote speakers at the Department of Chemistry at the University of the West Indies. I think this was 2019. And again, in the middle, we are at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., where we were both inducted as fellows of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. And of course, the pride of our life, our daughter Adila, who was born while we were students at MIT. And this was taken, I think, on the day that she was married. She has since gifted us a grandson, and a son-in-law, and of whom we're quite proud. And he is blessed with the capacity to do wonderful things. Let's see, where is he? There you are. Oh, I didn't put in the audio. I apologize. But you can see that he has a predisposition to the steel band. He loves to bang on things. And so, just to summarize, I've spent 15 years in industry, 17 years as an active professor teaching and doing research, 8 years in university administration, and I've dedicated the rest of my life to issues related to sustainability. So that's me in a nutshell. Oh, I serve as the editor-in-chief of a journal, the Journal of Bioengineering, and I do research in trauma and in transplants. One of the areas is in fact, applying artificial intelligence to the grading and staging of transplants, very complex bits of tissues that have to be transplanted from one patient to another. These are called allografts. And so that's one of the areas of scholarship in which I'm currently involved with my colleagues at Johns Hopkins University and at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Let me just get this out of the way. So, a quick note about, I mentioned Trinidad and Tobago, and a quick comparison between Trinidad and Tobago and Mauritius. So, here is a simple summary comparison. Population 1.3 million in Mauritius, 1.4 million in Trinidad and Tobago. Mauritius is about 30–40% smaller than Trinidad, and Trinidad and Tobago is a two-island nation. But these are small nations nonetheless. Here is a very interesting comparison, what is called the Economic Freedom Index of the Heritage Foundation. Gross domestic product for Mauritius is about 28.1 billion. For Trinidad and Tobago, it's 37.7 billion. But look at the compound annual rate of growth over the last 5 years. Mauritius is just a negative 0.1%. For Trinidad and Tobago, it's negative 2.4%. Headed in the wrong direction. GDP per capita, 22.1 thousand per capita, 26.8 for Trinidad and Tobago. So these are two relatively wealthy countries. Unemployment rate in Mauritius is a bit high, 8.6%. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's 3.2%. Inflation is running at about 4% in Mauritius, and it's about 1.1% in Trinidad and Tobago. Public debt, 94% in Mauritius and 61% in Trinidad and Tobago. Roughly similar. A few subtle differences, but not altogether that big. But here is a summary index of the Heritage Foundation, the Index of Economic Freedom. Now, this Index of Economic Freedom takes into account a number of variables. I'm showing you the score, which is a summary score for these two countries compared to all countries taken together. All countries of our planet run at about 59%, just under 60%, and has been steady since 1995. But individual countries do experience some considerable change. I'm showing Trinidad and Tobago in red, and I'm showing Mauritius in blue. You can see that before 2007, Trinidad and Tobago was running above Mauritius, and then at about 2003, Mauritius began to show a great steady improvement in its overall economic freedom index. Presently, Mauritius is about 78.6%, and Trinidad and Tobago is below average at about 59.3%. This economic index takes into account such variables as the rule of law, adherence to trade practices, a number of things that feed into this. And you can look at the Heritage Foundation site to gain some perceptions of this. My purpose in sharing this with you is just to show as a backdrop that indeed wealth does not create this notion of an economic freedom. That indeed it's much more than just wealth. It's about perceptions of the value. And so as a backdrop for innovation, how a country is perceived by its citizenry is important. Let's talk about the who, how, and why of innovation. At Texas A&M University, where I spent some 5 years as a titled professor, department head and associate dean, there was a school of innovation. I say was. It's recently been discontinued. A school dedicated to innovation. And it was a most unusual construct. This school did not have its own faculty. It recruited faculty from other schools, business school, engineering school, vet school, wherever people were being creative, imaginative, and innovating, these were the people who were brought together. And the School of Innovation was purely a place where they facilitated these expressions of creative outlet. In the US, there is something known as the Council on Competitiveness, which for the last 30 years has been a very important fixture in American competitiveness ecosystem development. They are the champions of a non-partisan development of entrepreneurs and commercialization of new ideas. That they work with the administration. These are captains of industry, captains of the academic sector, captains of the public sector who come together to emphasize the importance of entrepreneurship and the preservation of the policies and practices to preserve creative thought and expression and development of ideas into products. And I think Mauritians can take a good example of this as a way forward, which is to bring people together in discussion and discourse about what should be the agenda to stimulate continued attention to creative expression. So one of the things that the Council on Competitiveness did is they did a tour of many of the major cities in the United States, and they engaged people in those cities around the topic of, well, what does it take to build a competitive ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship, creativity, the notion of ideas to products. And one of the speakers was the Chief Technical Officer of ExxonMobil. One of the speakers was a very successful academic entrepreneur, and one of the speakers was an assistant director of the National Science Foundation. And they were each asked what were their thoughts on innovation. And the Chief Technical Officer of ExxonMobil said innovation was the movement of ideas from one sector to another. The notion of taking an idea from one space where it had been successful, and then moving it into a space where you would not normally think it would apply, and implementing it there and having success with it. Well, there are many examples, but the example that he was particularly proud of is the fact that ExxonMobil, along with the engineers who work in exploration, oil exploration, and fracking, and oil extraction, would convene a conference with cardiovascular engineers who were thinking of blood flow through arteries and arterioles and venules and veins and flows of fluids under different conditions. And it turns out that they use the very same sort of equations. the same fundamental phenomena that describe the flow of fluid in the vasculature is the same set of fundamentals that describe flows of fluids in porous rock. So there's much in common for these two communities that are quite different. And that was an innovation, to be able to bring ideas from one space into the next. So the things that were being developed by the oil exploration community, that the cardiovascular engineers said, wow, we could use that. And then the cardiovascular engineers were doing things that the downhole engineers could say, hey, there's something we could use that. So their definition of innovation was being able to move things from one space to the next. The successful entrepreneur defined innovation as the process of leveraging creativity to produce things that did not exist before. Most entrepreneurs are starting off with an idea for a product that didn't exist before. No one had an app for that. No one had that device. No one had ever thought of building this widget. And entrepreneurs think of things that are being innovative because they're new. They didn't exist before. So startup companies that come up with new medical devices, new implantable defibrillators or the like, or new Internet of Medical Things, being able to monitor a patient in a remote setting and have a physician in Texas attend to a patient in Mauritius, is considered a major innovation. And for the assistant director of National Science Foundation, they said, innovation is about discoveries that emerge out of basic research. So let's do basic research and hope that that leads to innovation. And so in the United States, we have the most Nobel laureates per capita of any other country in the world, but yet we don't lead in some technological areas. But a perspective on innovation is, let's do basic research, and that basic research would produce this high rate of original publications that can lead to innovation. So what is innovation really? This website speaks to innovation, and I often visit this website to find out what's hot and what's not. And the last time I visited, I think 4 years ago, there were 15 experts that had been polled for their perception of innovation. And most recently, 26 total experts have been polled, and they have contributed their ideas. And the summary of all of their contributions is that innovation is executing an idea which addresses a specific challenge or need and achieves value for both the provider and the recipient. The company and the customer, the provider and the recipient, both of whom have to have a value proposition met. But at the end of the day, innovation is really about impact. Things that impact and have a change in the ecosystem. So to achieve that, one needs a healthy ecosystem. One needs creativity has to be endemic to that ecosystem. That is, creativity needs to be nurtured and supported and cherished in that ecosystem. And the individual, as well as the organization, need to be resilient in the face of that creativity in that ecosystem. And both need to be nurtured. Both the individual and the organization needs to be nurtured. And I emphasize both, because generally we think of the organization providing nurturing support to the individual, and not the individual providing nurturing support to the organization. But organizations are people. They are not these abstractions, they're people. So there's lots written about innovation, and we could go on at length about it, but I like this particular book that was written a long time ago by Curtis Raymond, who was the CEO at Stanford Research Institute between the period 98 and 2014. And one of the things that he pointed out, and he calls it the brutal educational reality, is that if you earn a PhD from a top engineering school, it takes about 7 years to beat that PhD out of you so that you can become productive. And I can speak to that experience. It took about 3 years to beat my PhD out of me. And it's not that the PhD is a bad thing. It just doesn't prepare you for the notion that your job is not research. Your job is innovation. And that what you have learned is not what to do, but how to do it. How to go about investigating, delineating, making decisions about what to do and what not to do. And that teamwork and multidisciplinary collaboration are principal things. Most of us in the academy think of the immersion experience in a graduate degree as being a singular experience. You do your master's degree. You do your PhD. And in fact, in the world of work, you work with others. You don't do it alone. And the notion of even trying to do it alone is unhealthy. So the third thing is that your ability to present and to write and to communicate needs to be improved. In fact, that is limited because you're in this crucible of like-minded people where you are communicating to people who already know what you're about to say. You're telling your professor what you have done. You're telling your other professors on your examining committee what you've done. They already know what you've done. We try to encourage this kind of thinking. I serve, as I said before, as the editor-in-chief of Bioengineering, its journal, and we encourage articles that go beyond just the science, go just beyond the engineering, to document case studies and to talk about the translational component, the ability to move from bench to bedside, and talk about risk-taking and risk reduction in translational research. This is the research that moves your idea from the laboratory to a place where it has impact. There are books on this topic, and I use some of these books myself in instruction. We can think of innovation as both a process and a product. We can often look at something and say, oh, that's innovative. Or we may say, we want to engage a process of innovation. So innovation has this duality to it. It's both a noun and a verb. We can start with ideas and we incubate these ideas in many places. Here, within Unicity, for example, we have students who are working on projects, and these are ideas that they're not fully formed, they're not yet quite commercial, they haven't been adopted in the world of commerce, but they are being harnessed, they're being tried and tested, evaluated, and they're being framed in preparation for that. And that's a kind of research. But you would start in your garage or in some incubator facility or in a barn if you have one. That's not a concept that you may necessarily think about here, or in a laboratory, or in your basement, or in your backyard, or in some place. You have an idea and you're trying to test it out. But those ideas lead to inventions, a body of knowledge we call know-how, and that can eventually lead to a technology. There are two places you can do this. You can do this within a large organization, and that's intrapreneurship. So organizations like the Medine Group allow a certain amount of flexibility and adaptability with new ideas. I see a lot of the differentiation post-agricultural production in areas of leisure, areas of entertainment, areas of that would otherwise not be natural descendants of agronomic engagement, but they are nonetheless, someone had to be creative and say, yeah, we can do that. This is a possibility for us, and to take it. And that person had to have enough support within the organization to be allowed to lead it as an intrapreneur. An entrepreneur, of course, is usually an individual or a small group of individuals. And as Edgeworth would say, it should always be 1, 3, or 5, never 2 or 4. And 1 is not healthy because you end up speaking to yourself, and that's not good. 3 is best because you can break the tie. See, you can make decisions. 4 is not good because then you keep talking all day long about the problem and no one gets to have a decision made. So 3 or 5, and 3 seems to be the most popular number for a group size. So when we convene students at the university to do projects, we either have groups of 3 or groups of 5. Because we've got to break the tie to move forward. And we've got to focus on what that thing is serving, markets. We call them markets. Who are the end users or customers? What are their needs? I mean, really, what are their needs? What are their aspirations? What are you trying to fulfill? And so we've come up with these 6 I's. What are the issue? What is the issue? What is the idea to address the issue? Do the investigation. That's usually the research part, and that's the part that many of us either get sunk into because we're looking for certainty. We spend so much time trying to get certainty where there is none to be acquired. And then the innovation to address, the investment of time, talent, and finance to make it happen, and the impact. What or who is going to be impacted by this? So, an environment that fosters creativity, nurtures collaboration, and rewards risk-taking is a healthy ecosystem for innovation. New ideas can flourish and then be translated into real-world applications and solutions under such conditions. And here are some aspects that are important in an ecosystem. You need to have a culture of curiosity. People have to always be asking, wow, can we do this? How does that work? Why is this the way it is? Questioning, questioning, questioning. It's like having a 4-year-old in your midst. You know, 4-year-olds are always asking, why? Why? Let's go. No, why? And that kind of infantile thinking is something you want to keep with you, because that culture of curiosity is what exposes you to opportunities. An education system that favors impact over impact factor. Impact. What are we doing that really changes the course for everyone, rather than just produces another paper that can be counted towards your number of publications? Well, in the academy, we evaluate faculty on the number of papers they publish, and that's good because it's the low-hanging fruit of evaluation. It's just a number. I can pick that number without having to ask the tough question, are you having an impact, or are you on the course of having an impact on mitigating storm surges, or improving the quality of agricultural production, or improving the quality of the use of a natural resource in construction of new materials for habitation. We don't have to ask tough questions like that, because all I have to do is look at the simple number. You publish 3 papers or 5 papers, and then I can evaluate you. It's easy to do. You want to have patient funding. By patient funding, I mean monies that are interested in investing, but is willing to be patient and wait for you to develop, and not ask you the day you've given you the loan or made the investment, next day ask you, what have you done? You know, that's loan shark. That's not what we're talking about. So the money must be patient. And then we need policies that safeguard the sanctity of ideas. If you have an idea and it's your idea, we need to have institutional policies that guarantee that your idea is yours. and that others cannot take that idea from you and exploit it without involving you. So you need to have a patent protection system, or a system of copyright protection, or a system of trademark protection, or systems that protect the sanctity of rights in your ideas. And then you need to have a supportive infrastructure. I'm going to drill down for a moment on what I call patient funding and supportive infrastructure. So in the business of risk-taking, we often think, is the view worth the climb? Is the view worth the climb? And of course, there's one way to climb, freestyle, but it might be too risky. And there's another way to climb, which is with great security, but you might be so weighted down with certainty that you don't get very far off the ground. And risk-taking is somewhere in between. It needs to be prudent, it needs to be well thought of, well reasoned, and well rationalized. And you see this in the emergence of technology. I recall in the early days of what you're looking at here is sort of a technology landscape for a number of technologies that are very familiar to you. Clothes washing, dishwashers, VCR technology, the Internet of Things. Technologies all seem to have this S-shaped curve. They come, they grow, and they mature. Of course, many of you a few of you in the audience probably don't even know what a fax machine is. Or a few of you have never heard the screech of a modem. You've never heard what a modem sounds like, because that's old art, right? So there are a number of things that come within a lifetime, disappear, and you never knew about it. We have intellectual property protection in the United States that guarantees about 20 years of protection from the time of your creative idea is expressed and patented. You're given 20 years. Well, if that's a pharmaceutical that needs to go through clinical trials, by the time it gets to market, your patent protection has already expired. Now you understand why drugs cost a lot of money. By the time you get to market, your investment can quickly be usurped by another company that makes your drug off market, right? So off patent. So this window is crucial. In the good old days, we used to rationalize that it took about 30 years to get something from invention, from idea to market. 30 years. So that the inventor of the fax machine himself never saw a nickel of reward for that invention. By the time it got to commercialization, he was long gone. And it was, in fact, the patent already expired by the time it was commercialized. So patent protection and protection to get things to market is crucial. One of the things that you're quickly going to see, even in this graphic, is that more recently, the slope is sharper. Things come on more quickly and they disappear more quickly, right? So we talk about a rapid rise of technology and the disappearance of technology. You will see things come, stay for a while, mature, and go. Let's talk about patient funding. And there are a number of funding sources that we exploit in the development of ideas and commercialization of ideas. Of course, you can always go to start with your parents, if you have parents who are willing to give you money. And by the way, when you ask your parents to support you going to school for get an education, that's an investment they're making in you, right? It's an investment. They're seeing that they will pay for your schooling with the hope that that investment will pay off you either creating jobs when you graduate or taking a job when you graduate. But there are angel investors, there are individuals who have high net worth, who can give you money under structured conditions for a portion of your enterprise. In the US, there are things called Small Business Innovative Research and STTRs. All of the government agencies of the federal government, the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, they all have SBIR programs, so not NSF so much, but Commerce Department, all have SBIR programs, Small Business Innovative Research programs, to which you can apply for a grant and get $125,000 to start with an idea. You can take that and then convert it into a prototype. You can get a phase 1 or phase 2. Then you can turn to venture capital. Venture capital is structured money. They come in and invest, taking part ownership, but they generally want 5 times return within 5 years. You can apply for a small business administration loan. The US government makes about $28 billion in small business loans annually. 28 billion in small business loans annually and over the last 4 or 5 years. And of course, for most companies that are startup in the tech space, there are 2 opportunities to exit, either an initial public offering or be acquired by another company. Most are usually acquired. An initial public offering is one option where their stock then becomes traded on the public exchange. Let's talk about supportive infrastructure. A supportive infrastructure means tiered access to talent and facilities. Incubators, that is a building or a space where people can go and incubate their business. Maker spaces where they can design and build things, or an innovation hub that might be a place where they house an incubator and house a makerspace. And of course, individuals who are retired executives who may be a source of talent to advise others on starting their business. All of these are examples of access to talent and facilities. And I'll talk about innovation hubs, for example. So an innovation hub may have a virtual component, for example. It could house a makerspace. It could incubate businesses with simply an office or an office and a small lab. And they can provide gated access to other talent, such as accounting talent or HR talent or legal talent that you may need to start your business. But generally, the Innovation Hub focuses on providing a safe space for the development of your ideas and putting you in contact with, for example, schools, universities, where students have to do projects. You have an idea, you might take your idea and give it to a student group to develop. So innovation hubs are a very important part of that ecosystem and can play a very important role. Here is an example. I think I showed this slide in my education presentation on engineering education. And I'm showing now the notion of an education facility and an incubation facility. The education facility is on one side, and there's a firewall in between that separates the open part of it, the part where students and faculty work on projects that are being prototyped and developed and tested, and the commercial or business side where the ideas are being incubated. And this could be one building, but there's a firewall in between, and that firewall is necessary because we cannot mix the commercial with the open, and should not. So if there's a commercial interest, there needs to be clear delineation of proprietary separation between that which is open and that which is is closed and is proprietary to the individuals incubating the business. We could answer questions on that. But in general, innovation needs not to be an accident. It can be a structured, purposeful, organized, driven activity. Innovation is a complex process of developing and implementing solutions to unmet need, opportunities. But it need not be an accident. We need not say, you were lucky to have found that idea. You were lucky to have had that opportunity. No, it can be structured, it can be taught, and it can be addressed. And there are methods, tools, and resources that can help us in the search for opportunities and ideas to address these opportunities. And here are some examples. They're all quite popular in the innovation space. One of the approaches we sometimes take is if you want to know how to do something, ask someone how to do it. You get input. Or you can ask 10 people how to do it and triangulate it from those 10. Or you can ask 100 people. Or you could crowdsource it. You just, how do I do this? You could get thousands of people responding with ideas, and then you sift through it. Well, you don't have the capacity to sift through thousands of ideas that may be crowdsourced, so you get an AI tool to do it for you, right? So there are ways of converging upon approaches to solutions by just talking to lots of people. And then there are the 4 voices that was made popular by Robert Tanner to creative problem solving, how to identify opportunities and match them to solutions. The idea funnel, how to start with many ideas and to means test these ideas in a funnel the way you would normally put any fluid into a funnel and bring it to a pinch point and identify that which works. So let's talk about energy quickly, and solar farms and turbines. So energy needs, of course, are going to be challenging going forward in every space. And for island nations such as Mauritius, energy is going to be a challenge. Solar farms is one solution. I see, as I drive around Mauritius, I see lots of instances of flat plate collectors. I see some water heaters on homes with associated storage, and I can see that individual homes may be equipped to address hot water needs by using the sun to heat water on a flat plate collector. Great, but you could do this on a farm level if you have the space to use solar panels, and you can deliver that to the grid. And it's a way of bringing energy to small groups or to development that may be occurring on the island. So this is an environmentally sustainable approach. It's a green approach. It's the cost of solar panels is going down, and you know, we're getting to that threshold where it's very feasible to implement this on a large scale and be successful about it. So one of my colleagues has developed a company that does this, and we've been working together. He's put together a proposal that's now been delivered to Guyana, and we will learn about that proposal in the coming months. But site identification, funding, the concept development, all the pre-feasibility studies and the feasibility study to implement this, how to bring it into the grid, all of this company can do on its own. So the notion is to use solar farms as a way forward to deliver into developments, hospital systems, leisure systems, etc. Portable turbines turns out to be quite attractive, particularly turbines that use multiple energy sources, diesel, compressed natural gas, or syngas, turbines that can not just use jet fuel. They can use multiple sources, and they are adapted to multiple sources of fuel. We're thinking of how to use low BTU sources like bagasse, for example, to drive a turbine. And the typical configuration would be a grid and a utility service provider, or to deliver to a community that's under development, or to a particular industrial ecology space where several companies are in one industrial park and they need access to energy, commercial and public sector use. So turbines that are movable, portable, are a good example of how to command energy delivery outside of the usual way in which we fire and deliver energy. So I just wanted to quickly summarize some things that I didn't quite talk about, but the digital transformation is upon us. This is clear to those of us who are, to most of you. I like to say data is the new diamond. If you're not playing in the data area, you're not collecting that which is most useful. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are the new pickaxes of Industry 4.0. Big data demands AI, and AI depends on big data. And the two together really represent a path forward in innovation. Sustainability practices, once viewed as a cost center for organizations, now in fact are being embraced as a value creation opportunity for organizations. So sustainability practices that emphasize value creation is the path forward. How to maximize value in addressing green approaches to mitigate carbon, mitigate warming, mitigate sea level rise, etc. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
Do we have some questions online? No questions online? So if anyone online wants to have questions, so you can just send them directly in the chat box, and we'll take some questions from the audience. Any questions?
I have one question for your country, sir.
Yes.
I know that the environment of level is lower than Mauritius. So, what fields are general? What is the distribution of your workforce in Trinidad?
Good question. I do not have an answer for the distribution of the workforce amongst the energy sector, for example, or amongst public sector. I do not have an answer. What I could tell you is that there's been a trend away from agriculture and tourism because it's an energy, gas, and oil economy. They're one of the largest producers of syngas in the world. One of the largest urea plants in the world is in Trinidad. It used to be the largest for a while, but that was, the largest of anything is always only temporary. Yeah, but I don't know the exact distribution of the workforce. But notice that the unemployment was quite low, which is very interesting.
Question. I have a question.
Yes,
you talk about the School of Innovation. I would like to know, how does it function? Do you do courses and deliver degrees, or only having people together and try to develop, create products?
Yes, so the School of Innovation did not deliver degrees. It delivered courses towards other degrees. It did not have its own faculties. It recruited faculty from other colleges. And it focused on programs intended to stimulate innovation in those other colleges. I think it came on the scene as one of the few non-degree granting schools, and last year or the year before, it was discontinued. The dean of that school is now in the law school, and many of the faculty have gone back to their home departments. I haven't investigated why, but that doesn't mean that the concept of a school without a portfolio has gone away, because there is now a school of engineering medicine, which I helped found, and it's a school of engineering medicine that delivers an engineering degree from the College of Engineering and a medical degree from the College of Medicine. So the School of Engineering Medicine is a school that has no portfolio itself of degrees. It delivers degrees from other schools. It just delivers courses.
And do you think like now we should have like an innovation curriculum in like in an engineering course, like a module specifically on innovation?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and it need not be in engineering only. It is for business students, for engineering students, for students in arts and sciences. Any student who wants to pursue 18 credits of innovation can take an innovation module, innovation concentration, if you will.
Yeah.
I think so. And then they'll be exposed to all those elements of creativity, entrepreneurship, and the like.
Normally, on a work perspective, like people get caught up on the day-to-day. So how do you bring the innovative mindset out of the innovation ecosystem in that? Because they're also directed on operation side, but does it require us to be two teams, or can the same team be partially there? So
it's a good question. It's a very good question, and that's the hardest part. You've touched on what I think is the hardest part. How do you embed or inspire or incorporate innovation into the very fabric of day-to-day operations? People are firefighting. You arrive on campus, you arrive to work, and you have in your head your agenda of the to-do list. And most of the to-do list is just fight fires. I gotta do this, I gotta do that. You don't have very little time to think about, oh, how might I do this better? No, I just have to do it. So how do you embed that into the process? It's a challenge, but you know, we had a wonderful breakfast meeting this morning where we just got together, have some breakfast, get around the table, and we talk a little bit. There's an informal kind of agenda, and we brainstorm on things. That's one way to embed it, to create time to think away from the usual and customary, create that space. Some organizations have retreats, but very often they use the retreat simply to report out what I have done, what I will do. And you know, that defeats the purpose of using the retreat as a creative episode in the overall health of the organization. So you have to come up with one that matches your organizational culture, but it's the big question. How do you bake it in to the day-to-day and inspire it in the organization? Yeah, it's a good question. It's a great question.
Yeah. So thank you for the presentation. So you spoke about AI, and I would like to know that based on your experience, do you think that AI such as ChatGPT can pose a threat to the education field?
No, It will not. The straight answer is no, it will not. What it will do is encourage educators to truly educate. I think ChatGPT is like the dawn of Wikipedia. We were all worried that Wikipedia would undermine our ability to teach. And I had the wonderful experience myself of teaching materials science to a group of juniors, and I'm deriving some expression on the board, and the student said to me, "Professor," turn around. My back is, first of all, in the old school style, my back is to the student. I'm deriving. Who wants to look at my back? Okay, so the student says, "Professor, you've missed the sign. It's a negative, not positive." I said, "But no, yeah. Well, how did you know?" "I can see it right here in Wikipedia, Professor." I said, "Okay," and that was my wake-up call. That they were not there to see me derive expression. They were now there for me to tell them that this expression is useful only under these conditions. Remember the domain under which the assumptions that were made to this, and what are the limits, and what is the applicability, and why is it relevant, and why this has certain limits on it. So they were looking now to me to provide them with the experience of how to use this expression and why it's useful. Not to derive it, because that they can do on their own. Just ChatGPT is going to do the same thing. You're no longer going to give the assignment, "Tell me the pros and cons of this versus that." Well, that's a ChatGPT lookup. Okay, and in five minutes, the student has the answer. So now the question that this professor has to ask is, you tell me what the future of this field is going to look like. What is your opinion? So the student, "What? I have to go and read now all this stuff?" Yeah, go let ChatGPT tell you what the pros and cons are, and now you distill that and tell me what you think the future is going to be. So you change the assignments. Now this is really requiring us to rethink what we ask students to do. And then after ChatGPT and AI, something else will come along. Trust me.
I think we have questions on that. So just the questions here.
No, there's a Q&A.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, open it up.
Okay, so it's from Davidson. It says, "Great lecture. Could you please comment on the challenges in developing a flourishing innovation ecosystem in small countries such as Trinidad and Tobago or Mauritius? How could we leverage remote technologies to overcome this?"
Good question. First of all, there's the presumption that size is a limit. I don't believe that size is a limit. I think the size of one's ambition is the limit. Because in every space, people are doing innovative things. We are the products of very innovative parents and grandparents who have delivered us from colonialism and have given us great expansion since our independence. So we're not limited by our size, it's physical size. We're limited only by the size of our imagination. But you awaken in your question the notion of remote and how that might be useful. So now we have the opportunity, because we've learned post-COVID how to leverage and access the talents of others from other places. Just last week, we had the former CEO of Electrolux giving a great lecture on sustainability to Mauritians. Well, we have a distinguished lecture series where we have the world's talent now speaking to us directly. So we can leverage the talents of others to come into our space, because now we are comfortable just connecting by Zoom. And soon it will be something else, better than Zoom. So that's the other part. Now, what do we do with all of this? I think what we have to do, first and foremost, is abandon this notion of being cynical about our size. This notion that somehow our size limits us. I think this is, you can go to Singapore and they don't think like this. I never heard a Singaporean say, oh, we're just a small little island. They say, come and see Biopolis. Come and see this place. So there is a dimension to how we view ourselves that needs to be really put into check. We need to check. And dispel this notion that somehow we have to begin this conversation that the size is an issue. It's not. The ecosystem, I think, is a well and live. I'm learning that some of the things that first world and nations do, we already do here in Mauritius. We have forums for people pitching their technology and others listening to them. I heard about these kinds of forums. I used to think that only the MIT forum in New York or in Boston or in Washington, DC or LA used to do this, a place where if you have an idea, they convene a panel, you pitch your idea, and somebody will say, okay, I'll give you a few $1,000s to see how you do. And by the way, I want 10% of your company. But that exists already here in Mauritius. It could be developed. I think in part we have to learn to reward the success when we see it. One of the things that I've noted is that if we have a program, let's say for funding small farmers, micro farming, we have a program. The day we give out the loans, we have a big celebration, we give out the loans. And the cameras are there, and we have pictures in the papers and what have you. We never hear the other end, the impact end. What did they do? How much did they produce? How many jobs did they create? We never hear that. That just goes into some little report somewhere and it's displayed. We need to celebrate that. That's the part you want to celebrate. This notion of we have accomplished, we've had impact. So that's the part that needs to have the attention, in my view. And that creates a sense of hope and aspiration that overcomes the otherwise cynical view that because we're small, we can't do certain things.
One quickie one, please.
Yes.
You had a great slide about the right level of risk. Not too risky, not too risk averse. Speak to the idea of failure within that
Yes.
encouragement despite failure.
Yes. So, good question. In innovation, failure is more often the norm than it is. But we need to be careful of how we define failure. And part of the question is, well, how do we assess the risk, make a prudent decision based on risk and risk reward? How do we mitigate the risk? And when we do venture forward, how do we react when we don't succeed? Now, in some cultures, people are ostracized. You fail, no one wants to talk to you. One of the unique things that we've learned in the US is that people who fail often are cherished. Why? Because it means they've learned a lesson. I would much prefer to take a chance on someone who has done something and failed than someone who has done nothing and is asking me for money. That person who has failed at least has learned a lesson. He's not going to do it that way again. She's not going to take those kinds of chances again. So most entrepreneurs become serial entrepreneurs. That is, they start their business, they may not succeed to the highest possible level, and then they try again, and then they try again, and then ultimately they break through, and they've got this wonderful IPO. They become a distinguished professor at Stanford, and their company goes off, and and I'm referring to Judith Moon, like one of my friends. And so he becomes wealthy beyond all belief, but that was never his intent, of course. But failure is a part of the spirit of innovation, and it's your willingness to tolerate failure, your willingness to be resilient in the face of failure, that is distinguishing about your capacity to continue to grow and innovate.
Any other questions? I would like to ask about the government. You talk about the patents that take 20 years. So how can we improve on the policies of the government to help to put in place innovation?
I think government, of course, the public sector has a role to play, but it's not the main role to play. They have a supportive role to play. I think by and large, public-private partnerships are the way to go. And the public sector just needs to be sure to support the rule of law. Trust me, in French law, in our Mauritian/English-French unique Mauritian law, there's already provisions for safeguarding property rights and intellectual property rights. It exists. It just needs to be assured that, that it's going to be protected. So that's one of the areas that the public sector can play a role. The second is that the public sector can also provide some amount of support in the way it values the output of innovation. The public sector can play a role, as it does in the US, for example, in providing micro loans or innovation loans or innovation awards for individuals who are doing things that are of relevance to the public sector. We're not asking for gifts, and that's important. You can't look to the government for gifts simply because they are the government. No, you look to provide something of value to the public sector, but in turn, you look for their investment. So the public sector may be concerned about all of our resources. The coral reefs belong to all of us. It's a public resource. We are seeing a destruction of the coral reefs. We're seeing maybe you are doing something in that space to repopulate the coral reefs. If you have an idea about how to approach this, I don't see why the public sector couldn't support such an innovation. But their principal responsibility is to support and give credibility and give reliance and a sense of faith and trust in such things as the rule of law, adherence to public policies, that they would apply all policies equally to all, things like that. You just have to build confidence in governance.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one question. You were talking about the solar farms earlier. Yeah, we do have solar farms in Rochester.
Yes.
In fact. And what's the lifetime of those
solar panels?
And we are talking about sustainability, and how will we dispose of that later on?
Right. Is it? Yes. It is a good question. they're silicon wafers. They're basically sand. So they are naturally degradable materials. But yes, this is a concern, just as with all the batteries in electric vehicles. We need to be very careful that the sustainability solution of today is not the problem of tomorrow. So I take your question as a question of advisement. It's one that we need to be very careful of, and we need to think about the whole life cycle of a product when we deploy it. But for the moment, we are pressured at the cost of energy, and this is one of the short-term solutions. So we didn't have to be here. We didn't have to be in this pinch point. We could have addressed this earlier, but it's not in our DNA to be proactive. It's not in our collective DNA to be proactive. We tend to be more reactive.
Any other questions?
I'd like to share an experience rather. It's maybe 30 years ago when in the University of Mauritius at the college, some lecturers were trying to figure out how to map, the astronomy class, how to map stars, etc. And they had very expensive software to purchase. And one of them came with the idea of using what is now known as ArcGIS, but then it was known as ArcInfo, which is a geographical information system software. You use that software instead of looking down on the Earth, but up in the sky. And he did that mapping practically free of charge using that software, mapping all the stars. And then forecasting when we will have eclipses, etc., using that ArcInfo at that time, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Did he file a patent?
I learned that. What I used to allow.
That's very creative. That's very creative use there.
Yeah. Any other thing? So if you like to summarize what are the challenges, barriers to promote, to implement an innovation ecosystem?
Well, I think you've got all the elements in place. You've got enthusiasm. The Unicity International Education Hub seems to be a very creative and dynamic place that's looking to be a catalyst for innovation more broadly, not just in the education sector, but to intersect that education sector with the business and private sector and development of new ideas. So that's the germ of what it would take to really build an innovation hub. But it really requires deliberation. And I think when we do, it's important to get all stakeholders engaged early. All stakeholders should be engaged early. That's the advice that she always gives me. And by stakeholder involvement early in the process means getting company representation, getting labor representation, getting man in the street representation, getting student representation, putting together a panel of people to deliberate and to think through and create ownership of whatever we do, to avoid this top-down implementation where we have all the solutions and then we're going to not implement. Because innovation, an innovation hub is so delicate, it really requires buy-in from a lot of constituents. And those constituents need to have a sense of participation and co-ownership of the ideals, not the details, but the ideals. They all have to feel that, yes, out of this will come something that will serve people. So stakeholder engagement, making sure we know who the stakeholders are, getting their engagement, planning, being deliberate, being open, sharing it broadly with the community, whatever the process is. In other words, if you make sure it's out there on social media that you're doing this and people respond to questions when they come up. And if you don't have answers yet, we don't have answers yet. I don't know. We're planning, we're still working. So I think that would be my best advice.
And what about the emerging technologies and trends that maybe we would need to have in innovation?
Yes, I think that would require me to have a little bit more immersion in the Mauritian situation to be able to comment on what specifically you need. You are the best judges of that. I think it's often inappropriate for someone who comes from outside to come and tell you, well, these are the technologies you should be focusing on. Now, this is, please forgive me, this is your responsibility. Once you made your decision, others can help you, but ultimately your responsibility is to decide what matters to you. And so, last night we met a number of CEOs, met under the auspices of Medine, and we had some discussions. I think those people should continue to meet, set some priorities, and make some decisions about what's important. Not dictate, but make some broad strokes about what's important, and then we move forward with that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
on behalf of Unicity and all the attendees, we'd like to thank you for these exceptional talks and for celebrating with us our 10th anniversary.
Thank you.
And it's been amazing. I think everyone here we got a very good perspective of now how we want to implement this innovation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.